I know normal form is to send a gag out to the listeners at the start of the podcast, but you've been exceptionally busy the last week, haven't you, producing content?
I have.
And it's fair to say it's left you a little bit tired.
I am quite tired.
So I'm going to spare you the dad joke this week.
Thank you.
Instead, I've got a limerick prepared.
No.
There once was a poet named Bates.
Oh, okay.
His poems weren't always first rate. His first lines weren't bad, but the problem he had was he always tried to put too many syllables into the last line.
Well, I found it funny. No one else in the room found it funny. I can't hear any other laughter, and we do have extra people in the room today. So we've got Tom as usual. Erin's there. We got a photo of you, Erin, actually, that we might share with the viewers. So if you're listening to the podcast on your favourite podcast platform of choice, and you want to see that, we might stitch Erin up and put a picture up.
Yeah.
And that would be on youtube.com/theconstantgeekery podcast. And also in the room today, we've got Abby, who is our new marketing manager in our digital agency. So she's sitting in to see how rubbish we actually are at doing podcasts and videos.
See the material she's got to work with, basically. So,
if she walks out halfway through, we'll all understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our main topic for this week, and this is indeed episode 34 of season 2.
Is it really?
It is. Can you believe it? Our main topic is going to be 16 inches versus 16 inches. And just to clarify, we're talking about MacBook Pro.
We are.
So I see you've got out your 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro.
Yeah, it's a i7 core, a 6-core i7, and it's been my trusty workhorse for
some time
now. And I do actually like my 16-inch MacBook Pro.
And you haven't seen any of the new laptops yet in the flesh?
I am spoiler-free in terms of physically getting my hands on one.
So we're going to get a live reaction from Pete today.
I haven't seen any MacBook Pros, not just the 16-inch, not the 14-inch. Obviously, I've seen them on screens, I've seen them at the event, but not in the flesh.
We'll do that in a minute.
Quite
First of all, though,
excited.
Pete, we need to do the news.
Yeah.
And Apple quietly discontinued the 21.5-inch iMac this week.
They did, which is a bit of an end of an era, really, isn't it? That's been around for quite a while.
It has. It has also been replaced for quite a while.
It has, yes. I do wonder who would have bought one new from Apple since the M1 versions come out. One does wonder. Have any of you bought one? I don't know. Would you have bought one? Ever?
Well, unfortunately, we did buy some for the business.
Yeah.
Fortunately, actually, 2 of them are on lease, so we can send them back.
Yeah. Didn't we buy one? Didn't we buy the one that was a precursor to Apple's idea for the XDR screen?
The one that I mistakenly ordered the Visa mount version on.
Yeah.
And we had to buy an ARM to...
Got this
Don't make that mistake.
21-inch iMac turn up. It's like, where's the stand? It's like, I might have ordered the Visa mount version.
That's why it was cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am cheap. So I'm not sad to see it go. I don't like the little iMac. I think the larger iMac is fantastic. Really enjoy using the 5K iMac, but the specs on the smaller one were never exciting.
No, they were mediocre at best.
And I think as well, because as I just mentioned, we leased a couple of those for the business. And sometimes we buy the kit, sometimes we lease it. This time we chose to lease it, and over 3 years, and 2 of those years have been taken up by COVID, so they've been sat here gathering dust whilst we paid for them, which is pretty frustrating.
Gathering dust like 32 gigabytes of the RAM I've ordered for my MacBook Pro, I expect will be gathering dust.
We'll talk about RAM later.
Yes.
Any other news this week, Pete?
Yeah, Facebook changed its name to Meta.
Okay, so let's get on with the main event then.
Absolutely.
16-inch versus 16-inch. First of all, before we get the new one out, why the 16-inch was so popular? Let's talk about that.
So the precursor to that was, of course, the 15-inch MacBook Pro, which on the surface of it looked identical apart from being slightly smaller, and was the flagship MacBook Pro. But it had its issues, didn't it? We had one each.
We did, and there's a nice little sort of background to this. And the first video that I ever stuck up online on the channel was to do with my HP laptop, which went wrong, and HP made a right old mess of it when it went in for repair. And I got so fed up with the response I got from them, I actually phoned you up and said, let's indeed go to Bristol and get ourselves a couple of MacBook Pros.
Which we did, and we got the 15-inch MacBook Pros.
We did.
And I think it's the shortest amount of time I've ever had any Apple main computer, apart from the one that got nicked.
Yeah.
Which
Probably
is a story for another time.
Yeah, probably the same for me too. I found it a bit of an odd machine. So it used to get hot, and the fans would like to spin up.
I'll tell you how hot it got. So like the surface of the sun is pretty hot.
Yeah.
Well, there's obviously a well-known thing that's hotter than the surface of the sun, which is when you make a cheese and tomato toastie. The tomato slices that you put in it are super, super hot, aren't they? And they never cool down.
They don't.
And that was the kind of temperature that you were getting on your legs when you were using this for, strenuous things like using Google Chrome.
That's it. Just a couple of tabs open and it.
Yeah.
Or Microsoft Teams. That was pretty sure to drain the battery and blow the fans like crazy.
While sounding like a Harrier jump jet.
Yeah.
It was so noisy.
Yeah.
So you couldn't really do anything with it.
We actually had a situation. We used to do, pre-COVID, we used to do live video streaming, and we ran an event on that HP laptop.
We did.
Which had the quad-core i7 in and was absolutely fine. It ran the event without any problems. So taking in the video stream, converting it, downsampling it, and then uploading it, no problem at all. The next time we did it, of course, I had the 15-inch MacBook Pro, and we had that moment sort of halfway into the live event where I suddenly realised that the battery was at 4%. And I'm thinking, but it's plugged in. And what was actually happening was it couldn't charge the laptop quickly enough, so the battery was actually draining, and it had drained down from 100% down to 4%. So I halfway through this live stream, and I'm trying to fix this by turning the screen off, basically.
Oh yeah, you dim the screen down to like 2%, so you're like looking at it like I normally look at things because I'm blind. And I've never seen a man go into instant perspire mode. You were sort of like there, cool, going like that, and it was like dong on your forehead. Major panic. We got through it, didn't we? But
well, there was an interval, fortunately, and we were able to charge it back up. What a joke! Honestly, what a joke. So
yeah.
Thermal throttling, and then of course they went and put the Core i9, the 8-core chip into the 15-inch chassis.
It's just made it even worse.
And it got lambasted on YouTube, if you remember that. Apple actually mostly fixed that issue with software updates, and in fact we do have a Core i9 15-inch kicking around somewhere, which works fine, and there was no issue really afterwards. You didn't get the full performance, but it was okay.
Yeah. It's a good machine, actually. The developer that's got it now, he loves it. So,
but it was too late by then, So anyway, Apple brought out the 16-inch, and it just being slightly larger, the thermal envelope is better, and it could run that Core i9 8-core. Although most people buy the model that you've got here, which is the 6-core i7. Really good machine, decent graphics card in it.
Yep.
This has got the base 5300 in it, but you could spec it up to 5500, 5600M.
Yep.
And get really good performance. So for creative professionals who want to work on Mac, and I know there'll be loads of people out there saying you can get a faster PC, and yeah, we know. But if you're working on Mac, this has been a much loved machine.
Absolutely. I've done a lot of video editing on this in the time I've had it. It's the longest I've had. Conversely, compared to the 15 inches, the longest I've had an Apple laptop.
It does look well used. Those keys look well polished.
Yeah, they've gone super shiny, haven't they? And there's nothing you can do about that.
So I think the moment has come where I need to get Tom to hand me the new 16-inch laptop, and we can get your live.
Yeah. So I just again to reiterate, I have not seen one of these new MacBook Pros in the flesh yet. So this is a genuine reaction.
Do not drop it. Do not drop it.
Don't drop it, Tom.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, so wow. All right. So I can instantly see this is a different machine. So this is a 16-inch, yeah? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just have a look at it. Oh, it's heavier. It's a lot heavier.
Interesting.
It is a lot heavier. I love the embossing on the bottom. I like the feet being flat as opposed to rounded. You can move that one over there, yeah.
Let me move the 16-inch, the other one to this side.
I'm really curious because I just want to. Can you just put the lid down on my 16-inch for a moment? I just want to.
You're looking at the size, aren't you?
Oh, it is thicker.
It is.
Oh, it's a lot thicker. I know it's got feet that stand up a bit higher.
It's the feet that make it thicker. The actual.
Is it though?
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah, and the other thing is as well, you've got these tapered edges, and Apple has done this on the MacBook Air as well. And if you actually look at the profile of the laptop, in the middle, if you measured the thickness in the middle, I think you'll find they're pretty much identical.
Yeah.
But it doesn't appear that way, does it?
Well, I've got a DVD slot there. Look at that. Can you see that? Just no one's mentioned that. You've heard it here exclusively.
For the benefit of the people who aren't watching on YouTube, Pete was pointing to the vent hole.
Okay, so I'm now opening the MacBook Pro. Oh, it's got your face on it. That's not good.
Let me put my fingerprint.
Is it? Yeah. Okay.
So,
oh wow, that screen, that is very rich. It's very lush. I'm just going to open up. Can I open up notes and do some typing? Is that all right?
you can. You might see some notes that I wrote, possibly about you, in there. Just ignore those.
You said what now? No, that's not true. It was just resting in my account.
No, so what you're doing here is you're testing the keyboard.
This is Pete trying out the typage. Yeah, it feels. I tell you what, it reminds me of. Obviously, not the same amount of travel, but it reminds me of a Cherry keyboard. It's kind of got that nice mechanical crunch about it. Yeah, I like that.
I believe that compared to previous iterations, although the Intel 16-inch here has an improved keyboard, doesn't it, compared to the 15-inch?
It does.
But this, for me, is the best Apple keyboard that has featured on a laptop in a long time.
It's noisier. That's the only thing I would say about it, is noisier. So if you're on a Zoom call, one of our project managers in our digital agency is a very efficient and detailed note taker. So often you can hear her typing away. So that could be an issue. Oh, I have to do that. Might be an interesting video, mightn't it?
Let's define interesting video. I took a lot of grief for making a video about the notch. Apparently that wasn't interesting, but there we go.
I thought it was interesting.
We'll talk about the notch in a minute.
Okay, so what I'm just doing, I'm just bringing up YouTube now, and I'm going to do HDR video. And
Pete, do you want to tap your finger on this one, and then I can do the same?
If I just use the right finger.
Right finger, that's good. I know which one to chop off now if I need to.
Yeah, that's
access
fine.
your laptop.
So what I'm doing here is, and of course it's not streaming it anywhere near its optimum. One moment.
So with the display on these,
oh wow, okay,
Pete's enjoying that.
This is very, very lush.
And we won't be able to show you this on YouTube because you won't be able to see it. It's limited to 500 nits in normal use, the display, so it just looks like a normal MacBook Pro display. But as soon as you've got HDR content in, you get that peak brightness suddenly appears, and it goes up to 1,000 nits, and then I think it can boost to 1,600 nits, which you're really seeing there on that part of the video.
Could you? I've got the same video up there, and because I know some people like you. Yeah, put it. Just don't say it. I'm running Google Chrome. Okay, just open it. All right. This is about make it full screen.
Okay.
Because there are some people, and you're one of those irritating people that you can just see something or listen to something and go, it's a bit low in the high frequencies and it's a bit muddy and all that kind of stuff. I actually need to compare side by side to be able to see the difference.
Right. Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to do.
I've skipped it to the same page.
Okay. One moment. So you talk while I look.
I have to say, I can see the difference already. Yeah, there is a lot more going on. You can HDR is nice because you get those brighter brights, but you also get more definition. So you see more of the image, and it's more like real life. But it is quite a subtle effect, and you have to have the right content to view it. And I think I would say as well that this screen has a different color cast to that one.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah,
very slightly.
Anyway, we can't show you any of this on YouTube because it just won't come across.
It's really rich. So
let's stop talking about that.
Yeah.
And let's talk about instead the edges of the screen, Pete.
Okay.
So if you go back into desktop, what I'm interested to see is if you notice anything. So if you right click on the desktop and just choose a light
Shall I put it into a white, sort of a light colour for a
Yeah.
moment? Yeah. Okay. I know where you're going with this.
Well, And those who recall, of course, the M1 iPad Pro, which has the mini LED display.
Oh, yeah, I can see it. I can see it straight away. So I've just gone, I haven't gone for white, I've gone for a very light, well, it's called silver. It's an Apple standard colour, silver. And yeah, you can see the shadow around the edges quite noticeably.
I've tried to show this in videos on YouTube, and it just doesn't come out at all. But when you see it in real life, you can see the shadow. However, Pete, having also seen, I mean, here's my M1 iPad Pro here with a white background.
Yeah.
Which do you prefer?
Well, I think that that iPad's ridiculous with that stupid M1 in it and everything. So I prefer this. You're talking about from a screen point of view.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, it's less noticeable on the MacBook Pro.
And I think that's because there's a more of a graduation for the shadow. I think it's more noticeable on the 16-inch compared to the 14-inch as well.
Well, I wouldn't know because I haven't seen a 14-inch yet. And actually, that is something we need to do. We need to have a 14-inch because I'm still quite nervous about the size difference.
I should have brought it in, but Tom's got his here today. So
yeah, we'll have a look at that in a minute. What I will say is if I change to even, for example, I've gone to soft pink and I can still see it. But if I go to plum, it's still there, but it's not as noticeable.
I don't think you can say plum on the podcast, Pete.
Well, that's the colour. That's the standard colour that I've got there. Cyan is, I can't see it really on the cyan unless I'm really looking for it. So I think it's one of those things, a little bit like the notch, which we'll talk about in a minute, that probably after a while you don't really care about.
I have to say, I notice the shadow on my iPad Pro all the time. I don't notice the shadow so much on these computers. It's not a deal breaker at all. And the reason why there is one is because those mini LEDs, there's so many of them. I mean, there's 10,000 or something in the iPad Pro screen, so there must be even more behind this 16-inch display. And you just can't keep that brightness going all the way to the edge of the display. It's just not possible. So you end up with this slightly darker bit. But I think Apple has remodeled the display, is what I want to say, with different sort of filters and layers so that effect is minimised. But it is a very, very nice display.
I just want to say how I like the blacked-in keyboard. I think that makes it look it's better. It's nicer. It gives it a really premium feel.
Yeah, I did wonder whether it was actually a separate part that had been put in there. But
Looks like it's black anodized.
Yeah, I don't think it is though. I think they've just anodized or painted that specific bit.
Surely they would have anodized.
What about the
aluminium.
The trackpad, Pete? Is it about the same size, or is it possibly just so slightly larger?
It looks a bit bigger. It looks a bit taller.
It is.
Is it?
Yeah, I can see it ever so slightly, but we're talking about, what, a millimetre in each direction?
But it's got the same sort of feel to it. Obviously, this is a new machine, so it hasn't got the build-up of oil from the skin. Oil from the skin.
Yeah, well, Apple do make the best trackpads. I have to say, I've got a Windows laptop, a Razer laptop, and that has a fantastic trackpad on it, but it's still not quite at the level of the Apple trackpad. Before we get on to the difficult topic of the notch, touch bar versus function keys, Pete, which do you prefer?
I have kind of got used to using the touch bar, but at the same time, it's still, if you want to adjust things on the touch bar here, you have to press the arrow. I know you can configure all this however you want, but to get to certain things, you have to configure the arrow to get to your media keys. The only time I use the touch bar is when I'm doing live webinars and I want to be able to start media off from QuickTime Player without moving my mouse and therefore interfering with it. And I use the touch bar to press play, but I can do that with the space bar just as easily. In fact, I could just use the play button that is the F8 key. I much prefer it without the touch bar. The touch bar always felt gimmicky to me. This feels much more reliable.
And compared to this keyboard as well, it's full height function keys.
Yes,
which is nice.
Which is good,
Yeah. So I think overall a very nice upgrade. Let's talk though about the notch, Pete. I've got this set in dark mode at the moment. I mean, what are your initial thoughts on the notch?
To be honest with you, with the things that we're just doing, I saw it when I first opened it, but I genuinely haven't. It hasn't impaired my view. Because you've got the different ratio. for me, it feels like you've got your kind of screen working area, and then above that, you've got this kind of almost ancillary area, which is where your notch and your menu bar appears. And it really doesn't bother me at all. And I'm not saying that as some kind of Apple fanboy. It is what it is. It's out of the way. And I think when you're actually into something, it's not going to bother me.
No, and I agree with you. It is something you notice when you open up your notebook, although I'm getting more used to it. And it is quite jarring. You open up the notebook, it's like, oh, that's a bit ugly. But when you're actually using it, yeah, it does just fade into obscurity.
I don't think it's ugly. I don't think it's ugly. I think it's a conscious design choice. And with any design choice, people are going to be polarised.
Yeah.
There's some designs where people go, yeah, the consensus is it's a good thing, but there's a lot of design out there where it is polarizing. So it's subjective. I think it's a nice touch. I think it's a bit of brand recognition as well.
And I'm sure that other companies will make use of that brand recognition. So, Pete, I think the important thing now is to do some benchmarking.
Yes.
And I thought what we could do is we could play a little game of benchmark top trumps.
Okay. Where I've got all the rubbish cards. Actually, I've got all the good cards because I've got the nice.
You're holding
nice
the nice one.
So what we're going to start with?
If you open up Affinity Photo, for those who aren't familiar with Affinity Photo, it's a lot like Photoshop. We actually moved our agency over to Affinity's apps some years ago. We use Photo and Designer rather than Photoshop and Illustrator. We still have Adobe licenses so that we can use their apps occasionally, but most of the time we're working in Affinity.
It's not that we don't like Adobe, it's just that we don't really like Adobe, isn't it?
It's the subscription model. I think we paid for a 5-year business license with all the updates and 10 seats, and it's pretty much less than the cost of 2 Adobe licenses for 1 year.
Yeah.
That's the kind of... And I think Adobe, they charge silly money. But within Affinity, there is a benchmark tool.
Is there?
Yes, if you click on the Help menu and then go to Benchmark, and I'm just going to turn my laptop around so you can't see the screen. Okay. And if you just hit Run Benchmark, and it will just tick away there in the background. So what this is testing is CPU and GPU performance for vector graphics and raster graphics. So raster graphics, that's like a bitmap, pixels, JPEGs, PNGs, all of those kind of things. That's raster. Vector is like what you work with in Adobe Illustrator, where you're procedurally creating an image.
Mathematically describing something, isn't it?
Exactly. So draw a box here of this color, of this dimension, that kind of thing. So what that does is testing both of these things is like a real-world result, and the scores that it gives us are linear.
I just want to say mine's done.
This one isn't yet.
No.
The scores it gives you are linear, so if it's doubled a score, then it is indeed doubled a performance. And unlike something like Geekbench, which we will try in a minute, that's a synthetic benchmark. So it's a bunch of tests that are supposed to represent a real-world workload. But this actually is a real-world workload. If you get a higher score here, you will get better performance in Affinity Photo and Designer. So top trumps, Pete, I'm going to go vector single CPU, and I'm scoring 293.
Well, I'm scoring 529.
That's more.
That is, it's not quite double, but it's getting that way.
So the single core performance in this machine is almost double this machine.
Yeah.
You're gonna notice that when you're using the computer. Single core performance is important when you're doing
day-to-day stuff.
A lot of day-to-day stuff. Yeah. Your Microsoft Excel, for example, although it will use multiple cores for certain things, most of the time it's running single core. Your Microsoft Word, your email client, lots of things like that will be impacted by single core performance. So that's quite a difference. What about vector multi-CPU? I'm scoring 1,495.
I'm scoring 3,251, so more than double.
More than double. So in here we've got the M1 Pro with the 10-core CPU. It's got 8 performance cores and 2 efficiency cores. They're both 16 gig, and it's absolutely mullering this one. Amazing. What about raster? So multi-CPU for raster performance. I've got 394.
923.
Wow.
So that's, again, it's more than double.
Yeah. So if you're working with raster images, i.e. you're a photographer, you're going to see a big difference in moving from something like the 6-core Intel i7 to the M1 Pro. In fact, you'd see a big difference going to standard M1.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite amazing.
Absolutely.
But now we get to the interesting bit. This is GPU now. Now, this laptop only has the base 5300M in, but for raster single GPU performance, I'm getting 11,242.
So for raster single GPU performance, using the Metal framework, I'm getting 16,842.
Wow. And this is got the 16-core GPU in this machine. So when those Macs
I can't wait to see what that does.
24-core and 32-core GPUs, it's, we are talking about way ahead of what the 16-inch could offer. Except this, of course, has an integrated GPU in the CPU as well. So you've got Intel UHD graphics 630 on here, and Affinity Photo will make use of both of those. So actually, I also have a multi-GPU score, which you won't have,
right,
of 12,826.
Okay.
So it's still nowhere near.
Correct.
So this was the entry-level 16-inch Intel, and this is the entry-level 16-inch Apple Silicon.
Yeah.
So it is a massive step up. Massive. We have the combined scores as well, but I think we've probably already demonstrated the performance. So let's move on. Let's do a Geekbench test, shall we?
Yes, because we are indeed geeks.
I'm just going to screen grab that window because we'll add the results from this machine into our testing for all of the different machines that we're doing.
Okay.
Okay, so Geekbench, you're just going to run that. So Geekbench, we'll run the CPU benchmark. Press go at the same time. This is as I said, it's a synthetic benchmark. So what it does is it runs through a bunch of tests. Like at the moment, mine is doing text compression. Now it's doing image compression, navigation tasks. So that's, defining a route on a map, that kind of thing. We're doing some database stuff, some PDF rendering. All of these things are things that you do.
Clang.
We're doing some clang. All of these things are things that you do in your normal computing life. And all of these tests are therefore representing that.
Just
However,
did some rigid body physics.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
However, you've totally thrown me off my train of
Things you
thought
do
there.
in normal everyday computing.
Right. But what you will find with Geekbench is that the Apple Silicon chips, the particular suite of tests that run on Geekbench, favour the Apple Silicon chips.
Do they?
Yes.
So they're biased?
No, they're not biased. It's just that all architectures respond differently to different things. So there are things that Intel architecture does better,
Okay.
and there are things that Apple Silicon does better. So if you take the scores from Geekbench, as a lot of people are doing, and then comparing them directly to Intel chips, it's not actually a completely
It's not
fair
a fair
comparison.
test. Right, okay.
But it is completely fair for us to compare to Apple Silicon machines, which is not what we're doing today. But two Apple Silicon machines you could compare with Geekbench. So typically for Intel, what you'll find is the score is a little bit on the low side. And what we'll do in a minute is we'll set Cinebench running. But that does take 10 minutes or so to run. So
We could run that and then carry on talking.
we could do that.
Oh, mine's finished.
Mine's still going. So go on, tell us what your scores are.
Okay, so I got a single core score of 1,774. And I've got a multi-core score of 12,506.
Okay. I mean, that is just absolutely huge. Those scores are massive compared to what the Intel's going to score, but it's still working on a bit of ray tracing at the moment.
Yeah.
Structure from motion, whatever that is.
To be fair, though, as you said earlier, Intel is better at doing some things than Apple. Like, bad adverts trying to mock Apple. They're much better at that than Apple are.
I think we should also just be fair and say is this 9th gen Intel in here? And Intel made a huge step up with their 11th gen chips, particularly when it comes to onboard graphics. Right, I've got my scores. I've got 1,076 for single core.
Compared to 1,774.
And then 5,483 for multi-core.
Compared to 12,506.
And again, I'm going to say these are the entry-level models. So this is the Apple Silicon one here is a direct replacement for this Intel machine. And this is late 2019, so it's only 2 years old.
Yeah.
to go that far in 2 years is astonishing.
It's a quantum leap forward, I would say.
Mm.
We've used the term game changing quite a lot, but it's not just hyperbole, is it? It is true.
It's definitely true. And this score that we've got here, 5,483, 2 years ago, we'd have been pretty chuffed with that. That's a good score.
Definitely.
For a 6-core laptop CPU,
Like
that's
that.
a good score.
Yeah, I've been editing happily on this for that time, and I've been pleased with it.
Okay, one more test before we move on.
Okay.
Let's do Blackmagic RAW speed test. Now, Blackmagic is a line of camera makers. That doesn't make any sense. They're a line of cameras. They make cameras, but they also make broadcast equipment and various other things. And their cameras shoot in a RAW codec called B-RAW, Blackmagic RAW. And it is fairly intense. You cannot benefit from the internal media encoders in the laptop for B-RAW, as far as I'm aware, at the moment. So this test is purely
Grunt.
CPU horsepower and GPU horsepower.
Yeah.
And
so, can I press start?
press start.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll get an instant result, pretty much. So what it's doing is it's measuring the frames per second that the machine can handle.
Ooh.
And I think it might be a little bit surprising with this. But what are you getting for CPU, Pete?
28 FPS.
Okay, so this is for an 8K Blackmagic RAW stream. So you can play back using the CPU at
28 FPS.
And on the Intel machine, it's 35.
Really?
Yeah,
So that just proves the point you were saying.
Yeah.
Intel is better at doing certain things.
it is. Yeah, and there's a lot of hype going around about Apple Silicon. It is certainly true that Apple Silicon is faster overall than equivalent in Intel chips. There's absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. That's an undeniable fact. However, there are certain areas where an Intel CPU will outperform Apple Silicon.
Yeah.
Let's go with the other test here, which is the metal test. So this is now using the 16 GPU cores, Pete. What are you getting in frames per second?
I'm getting 163.
And I'm getting 47.
Yeah. So
And this is another classic example because the GPU in here, if you were to play a game or do something that involves raw compute horsepower, I think you would find the margin of difference wouldn't be so great. It would be more like what we saw in Affinity Photo.
yeah.
But here, the margin gets much bigger because certain generations of graphics chip do certain jobs better than others.
Yeah.
And there you go.
I am playing a game right now to see how the performance is, and it is pretty good.
I do think chess count. I can hear a noise. Is that the fan of this thing? It is. So if you can, the fan has spun up on the Intel 16-inch. Pete's going to point his microphone at it.
You can actually hear that.
And if I just move this out of the way, Pete, can you just point the microphone now at the Apple Silicon one? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. And that's quite important, I think, to a lot of people. And this one is quite warm, and this one is cool to the touch. So the Intel does certainly...
Like its current operator.
Right, let's. We're going to start Cinebench going. We're just going to do a 10-minute run of Cinebench, and we'll carry on and tie this up with our thoughts. Do you think, Pete, that this is a worthy successor as an entry-level 16-inch?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There is nothing about this, and I mean nothing, that I'm disappointed about. You start that away there.
I'm going to move this one out of the way a little bit because it's blowing its fan like crazy.
Okay. The chassis is beautiful. I love the extra connectivity. The I/O on it is great. I love the attention to detail. I love the feel of it. It is definitely heavier.
Mm-hmm.
I like the keyboard. I like the aesthetic of the keyboard. The screen is absolutely lush. It's so rich. And I never thought I would really appreciate how much better that is, because I am not like many, I'm not ones that can instantly detect, that screen's, the blacks aren't quite as black as my other screen. But comparing the two together, it's definitely a significant step up. And the performance is mind-blowing. I mean, yeah, in every way, it's a worthy successor. And the notch on this one is better than on that one.
Okay. And I think pricing-wise, I'm struggling to remember now what the entry level... In the UK, I'm pretty sure it's been 2,400 for a while. and I think this is at the same price point, or it's within £100 or $100 of each other, and you're getting so much more for your money. If you're working in any kind of creative work like photography, video, and anything like that, music as well, this is got a lot more power on offer. You're gonna be very pleased with the performance.
I was talking to a video editor friend the other day, and he that is his living. That's his bread and butter. That's what he does. I was actually surprised that despite that, and doing some serious editing, he still has a 5.1.
Oh, the old cheese grater.
Yeah, as his editing rig. Admittedly, it is spec'd out to the gills and it's been upgraded many times, but we were talking about whether it is now time for him to upgrade, and he says yes. He's probably lost months in productivity because of not upgrading sooner, but he now does feel that this will be the time to do it. So I'm hoping that we might be able to do some sort of real-world tests with him to see what his views are and compare it maybe to a 5.1. You might say, well, that's ridiculous. Why are you comparing it to such an old machine? But actually, it's a real-life use case, so it's not ridiculous at all. If you're a video editor using an older piece of equipment and you're thinking, how much difference will this make to you? Well, here's a real-world example of that, because he can't be the only one.
Yeah, I'm sure. So we're going to do some fairly hefty video testing with these things, and we're going to do some more benchmarking as well. And we've got two M1 Max machines on order.
Yeah.
Mine has apparently left Germany this morning, where it was delayed. So at some point I'll receive that.
That's really nice.
It is.
That's really nice.
Tom, our managing director here, he got his yesterday.
Did he?
Yeah.
That's nice.
That's nice for him, isn't it?
That is nice.
Any news on yours, Pete?
Well, I'm actually concerned. I'm concerned that by the time it gets here, it will be the equivalent of a 5.1.
It'll be out of date. There'll be an M2 will have come out by then.
Based on current progress, M5 will be out.
All right. So anyway, once we get those, we will do the testing, and video editing is definitely one of the things that we want to try out on this. And we're going to throw into the mix as well the Intel iMac that we got upstairs, which aced all of our tests last time.
Yeah, it came out on top in most of them, didn't it?
It beat the M1 as well.
It did.
And that's primarily because of the GPU performance of M1. So we'll throw that one into the mix. I think we should put the 16-inch Intel in, and we'll do all the benchmarks so that you've got some kind of measuring points against the previous generation of
that'll be really
machines.
useful for everyone.
So when it comes to M1 Pro chips,
Yeah.
I think we're possibly at the point where we can share some insights. So I've been testing. There are basically three variants. You can have an 8-core CPU with an 8-core GPU. You can have a 10-core CPU with an 14-core GPU, not 8. And you can have a 10-core with a 16-core GPU.
Yeah.
So these three different options. So what we've got here is the 10-core 16 GPU, and the other laptop I've been testing is the 8-core with the 14 GPU. So we can also assess what the middle performance is going to be like, because it will be the same CPU performance as this one and the same GPU performance as the other laptop that we've got. So we are in a position where we can say quite confidently now which one of those is going to be the best option. And the uplift is $200 from the base model on the 14-inch. It's $200 more to get an extra 2 CPU cores. And if you want to go for the full fat 10-core 16 GPU, it's $300.
Yeah.
So, and of course, on the 16-inch, you can only have the 10 cores with the 16-core GPU. So we're only talking about the 14-inch here. If you buy the 16-inch, that's the one you're going to get. When it comes to the CPU performance, based on my testing, I think it's...
Does it make sense to go beyond the base model if you can?
I think it depends what you're doing. Yes, there is more performance on offer, roughly 25-ish%. Is it worth $200?
Depends on what you're using it for.
That's it. Single core doesn't change at all. So it's only multi-core. So if you're using an app that is definitely going to make use of multi-core performance, then it might be worth the upgrade to you. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, stick with that base model if you're going for the 14-inch. It's a really good value for money. And it is already 25% faster than M1, which in turn is already quite a bit faster than this machine. I mean, we scored, 5,500 here on multi-core in Geekbench, and I know bearing in mind the things I said about Intel versus Apple Silicon and Geekbench, but the M1 scores 7.5, 7,600. It's a huge upgrade. So M1 on its own is already a very high-performing CPU.
Definitely.
When it comes to GPU performance, going to an M1 Pro over a standard M1 makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
Because you've got so many extra cores.
Yeah.
But then going from 14 cores to 16 cores,
For that extra £300, it feels pretty negligible, doesn't it?
it's not worth it.
No.
If that's the only reason for going for that more expensive chip is because you think I'm going to get more graphics performance.
Probably not so much.
No, I don't think it's worth it. So all of which comes back to the point that entry-level 14-inch, which is at £1,900, $2,000, is a phenomenal professional laptop. And it shouldn't be viewed as some kind of lesser...
It shouldn't be viewed as a token entry price point gesture.
No.
It's a solid, good, credible machine. You'd be happy with it in most use cases.
So what about RAM? A lot of people are asking me, should I get 16 gigs or 32 gigs? And I've not been able to personally test that, but Max Tech did a pretty comprehensive test of it, which was very revealing. So how would you advise people now?
Well, I would advise, as we've always advised, because these machines aren't upgradable, get the most RAM you can afford, because you're not going to be able to upgrade it later if you do get less than you need, and it will help your resale value. That having been said, it is a massive £400 or $400 upgrade. So if that is eye-watering for you, with the optimization in these chips, the 16 gig will probably do you well. But as always, we say buy the most you can afford.
Yeah, which was easy to say when it's a cheaper upgrade. I think going from 8 to 16 on the M1 is 200, isn't it? And that is definitely worth doing, by the way. A 16 gig M1 is much better.
But you have to pay the Apple tax.
You do. When it comes to the 16 gig versus the 32, in Max Tech's test, they basically showed there's almost no difference. The 32 gig is faster, but and they were absolutely torturing the machines as well with the testing they were doing, and it's still, there was next to nothing in it.
They even had Chrome open, didn't they?
I think they did, with more than one tab. And they were running YouTube through it, and he was doing an export from Lightroom at the same time as running Cinebench or another benchmark. I can't remember all the details, but it's pretty amazing to watch. What they did show all the way through is the memory pressure. And the 16 gigabyte model is obviously having to chuck lots of memory into swap in order to achieve this.
So do you think we could end up with an SSD gate debacle again, which actually turned out not to be a debacle because we've had very few reports of SSDs failing in the M1s?
Yeah, and I do think this is an important point because a lot of people will say this is going to reduce the life of your SSD. I think that's possibly true. Well, it is true because SSDs, you reduce their life every time you write data to them. The question is, how long is the lifespan, and will it outlast the useful life of the machine? Something I think that this is pure speculation on my part, but I think that Apple is using something called cell emulation. So with NAND flash, which is what SSDs are made of, there are various different types of cells. So you start off with single level cells, and these are the most expensive. And a single level cell has two states, on or off. And they last an enormous amount of time, but they're expensive because they use up so much space.
Yeah.
After that, you go to multi-level cells, which is actually four states, isn't it? So 2 bits of data.
Yeah.
Then we go to triple-level cells, which then is 4 bits of data, so 8 states. And for each of these changes, what you're doing is you're making the gate for the electrons just much smaller. So when it degrades as you're writing data to it, it fails faster.
Yeah. They're just not as robust, are they? They can't be because they're so small. But
a single-level cell will last at least 10 times longer than a triple-level cell, and sometimes more than that as well. What a lot of people don't realise is that you can emulate single-level cell behaviour using a triple-level cell and get the same lifespan benefits. So do we not think that Apple, with its enormous team of SSD engineers and the fact that its SSD controller is on chip, is part of the M1, do we not think that they've adapted the behavior of the SSD for the M1's memory behavior, that memory compression and moving stuff to swap all the time? I'd be astonished if they weren't using cell emulation for at least part of that NAND flash, and the part that they'll use it for is the swap data.
Yeah. They will have designed the entire system on chip knowing that swap behavior was the norm, more than, I mean, it is the norm with any system, but particularly so with this architecture. They wouldn't have just gone, right, we'll just plug in an SSD with an onboard controller. It is deliberately part of the package. Therefore, it won't have been left to chance. And as you say, they've got a massively talented team of SSD engineers, so they know what they're doing. So I don't think it's a problem.
No, I don't think it's a problem either. I think if you are going to go for one of these machines, it's probably worth going for a 1 terabyte SSD if you can, because they're faster. The larger SSDs are faster. I think, as you go up, they do increase their speed. I haven't seen the 7 gigabytes per second that Apple advertised, but certainly this 16-inch is faster than the 14-inch, which has a 512 in it.
Interesting.
So bear those things in mind as well, and hopefully that's helpful for buying advice when you're selecting one of these machines, because they're not cheap. They are designed for professionals who will look at this from a professional business perspective, claim back tax and various other things, but a lot of consumers and enthusiasts are going to buy these things as well, and they're not cheap. So it is important that you get the right one.
Yeah. So what about M1 Max then?
Don't have any yet.
It's annoying, actually, because I'd like to play with mine.
I would be.
It's not arrived yet. In fact, it's not even shipped yet.
That's a shame. We will play with those, and we will give you all of the information on our main channel, youtube.com/constantgeekery, and we'll bring you that content as soon as we've got the machines. And I know lots of other people have got the machines, so you can probably find out the information you want already. Hopefully you'll stick around to get our viewpoint on it as well.
And if you have got one already, good for you. I'm really happy for you.
All right, let's just quickly come back to our Cinebench results, because you might have been able to hear that the fans have died down, and that means the test is finished. And the Intel managed 6,587 points.
And the M1 Pro is 12,386 points.
So still an absolute whooping, but the margin of difference is not as great as it was in Geekbench. And this is what we're talking about with, when you need to just sort of take the Geekbench scores with a little pinch of salt, I think.
So what's interesting is just that even the render on Cinebench, you can see it's richer on this screen compared to, it's slightly more washed out. This has got definitely, there's a slight green cast to that.
There's more dynamic range on this mini LED display, that's for sure.
Yeah, it is noticeable.
Very nice. When it comes to M1 Max, again, let's borrow from one of our friends, a subscriber of the channel. Chano, making up words as I go along. Tally Hotech.
Hello there.
In Australia, he's been testing these things, and he did a very interesting test with the M1 Max with the 32-core GPU, comparing it to a ThinkPad, a very similar size, creator-based ThinkPad that has an RTX 3080 GPU in it.
Yes, but when you say it has an RTX 3080 in it, can you please clarify that?
It has a low wattage RTX 3080. I hate the way NVIDIA does this, but we'll come back to that. And the performance, he was running the Tomb Raider benchmark, and the M1 Max was comfortably ahead of the RTX 3080.
Yeah,
outscored it. Now, he made it very clear, of course, that this is a low wattage GPU, but it was a fair comparison because they're similar size laptops, similar thermal envelope, everything else. So then he has also done a test with his Lenovo Legion, which has the full-fat mobile RTX 3080 in it, and that was a massacre. It was significantly ahead, almost double in some cases, over the 32-core M1 Max, which is what we'd expect for gaming. No one really expected that the Apple Silicon was going to take on an RTX 3080. However, he then unplugged them.
Did he?
Yes.
And then what happened? I can probably guess, but go on.
Well, the M1 Max scored exactly the same.
Yes.
Because it does exactly the same on battery as it does plugged in. The Lenovo was locked at 30 frames per second, so the M1 Max was about 90, and the Lenovo was locked at 30. I think that's actually an artificial lock that's been put on by either Lenovo or NVIDIA, and you can probably take that off and get some more performance, but I don't think it would compete with the M1 Max.
You can get some more performance briefly.
Well, there's no way that it can supply enough wattage to the graphics card if it isn't plugged into the mains. The battery just wouldn't be able to cope with that.
No.
So, and that is the problem with these PCs. If you're looking at something from a notebook perspective, and yes, a lot of the time when we're working on our creative work, needing that GPU performance, we will be near a wall socket. But you can do it on battery with the M1.
But you say that, but we're in a changing world at the moment where people are working flexibly. One of the things I've always wanted to do is be able to go and spend the day sat in my camper van down by the coast working. And I probably wouldn't choose that environment to edit in for comfort and practical reasons, but I'd certainly use it for a day of working and Teams calls and that kind of thing. I couldn't do it with that one because my camper van, while it has power, it won't charge a laptop without being plugged into a hookup at a campsite or something like that. This will. So I think this makes flexible working, remote working more accessible, more flexible, and who knows, maybe I will do some video editing down by the seaside.
That'd be interesting. And maybe we could make a video about that. We could do some camper van editing.
Yeah, we could give that a try, couldn't we?
So, pretty exciting. Last thing to say about that, of course, is that afterwards the Lenovo laptop had, I think, 91% battery after just running one benchmark in Tomb Raider on battery.
And the Apple?
98%.
Okay.
There's just no contest. The ARM architecture and everything that goes with it is no contest. This is the future. And I found out the other day, actually, that Microsoft is working on its own chips. I know it's been doing the rebranded Qualcomm
When
chips.
you say it, you mean its own chips?
I believe so.
Really?
Yeah.
That's exciting news.
Yeah.
Genuinely mean that, because that means there's a contender coming forward, hopefully, that can control the software and the hardware.
Yeah, and it will
Like
happen.
Apple.
It will happen. So if you're a PC user and you're interested in all of this, but you're tied to PC, so you're not in a position where you can move to Mac, and you don't feel despondent about it. This is great news for everybody because it means competition is coming, and the other guys will catch up. There's no doubt about it. They've got huge teams of very, very smart people, and they will catch up.
They will.
Anyway, that brings us to this time of the show where we look at some rumours, Pete.
The rumour mill.
That actually was Erin shaking her head with disdain. But that wasn't actually terrible.
Thank
for
you.
once.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, well, I think we can thank GarageBand rather than the person who jabbed a finger at the screen.
I knew which part of the screen to jab.
Okay. Well,
That's like thanking a piano rather than Victor Borger. It's like, thank you, piano. Thank you, Steinway, for that. It's like, no, he knew where to hit the...
I think there's a slight difference between a set of chords and arpeggios that have been predefined by GarageBand in a particular key. Okay, I'll shut up.
Making me look bad to all the podcastians.
On the rumour mill this week, there is apparently a new, larger iMac coming.
Is there?
That's no great shock, is it? Let's be honest. But details starting to emerge on the rumour mill and the techosphere.
The digital grapevine.
Yeah. Apparently containing the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips. And again, I don't think that's unexpected either.
No.
What is possibly unexpected is people believe it's going to be called the Pro. We're going to have an iMac Pro again. And I think that's interesting because the iMac has always been a smaller iMac and a bigger iMac, or it has. Yeah, I think it always has been from the G5. Yeah, from the G5 onwards, there's been a smaller and a bigger one.
Yeah.
And yeah, but the Pro, we're going to have a standard iMac and a Pro iMac.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I can't believe that Apple won't bring out a bigger consumer iMac at some point, but maybe maybe it is on their roadmap, but they're doing things in a slightly different order. Because I would imagine there will be some people who will want that sort of fixed workstation approach for pro applications.
And I completely agree. I think the size increase, because the small one's now 24-inch screen instead of 21.5, so that does make a big difference for those the home user market. So do we actually need a bigger one for the home users?
You probably don't need one, but it may be something that comes, like I say, later, because you're quite right. The 24-inch does make all that difference compared to the old one. So, yeah, excited to see that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see which design language they use with it. Will it look the same as the smaller iMac?
No.
If they're going to call it Pro, then I would suspect not.
No, I think it will have more of this kind of aesthetic to it, possibly leaning towards XDR, as we've mooted in the past. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would, if they can get the parts. I mean, that's the thing that's held these MacBook Pros back, I think, is the mini LED display. What do we think about that kind of rumour?
I think on the traffic light system, that's got to be a green. It's largely expected, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd go green as well with that. I think possibly not the Pro name, I don't know. I'll probably go amber on that, but green on a new iMac coming with M1 Pro and M1 Max, definitely.
Yeah.
I don't think there'll be a bigger version of the chip in the iMac Pro, not this time round.
No, it's going to be a variation on the MacBook Pros, isn't it? But fixed workstation. I'm excited about that. I'd like to see it.
Yeah, me too.
Nice big screen. If it's got a nice big screen with that kind of depth.
Yeah. And
amazing.
That will be amazing, but it would be amazing if they use the existing screen, because the current 5K iMac screen, that's a thing of beauty.
Well, it is.
I love working on that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. But imagine that.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
I mean,
with some shadows around the edge and a notch.
Yeah. Actually, that is something. A new webcam in the bigger one would be good.
Okay. Any other rumours?
Yes, this is an interesting one. So, Apple are not strangers to music, having championed the iPod and numerous attempts over the years to do speakers. We've had obviously all the AirPods, the AirPod Studios, all that kind of stuff. HomePod Mini, HomePods, and back in the day, what was it that you had? The big white square thing.
The iPod Hi-Fi.
That's right, the iPod Hi-Fi, which wasn't really hi-fi, was it?
No, but it was good. It had a removable front screen, and Thomas, I took the removable front thing on it. It used to have 3 speakers.
That's right.
And Thomas prodded the centre cones on mine. I tried to repair it by vacuuming them back into shape, but it never was the same afterwards. So thanks for that, Tom, for destroying a piece of
Vintage
legendary
heritage.
tech.
Yeah, antique. Anyway, it's fair to say that you had to sit in the right place to get a decent soundstage from that. From that, it wasn't, and it was priced. I think it was like $399 or maybe $349, and it didn't go down well. It's fair to say. Anyway, there's always been this demand in certain quarters for Apple to produce a true audiophile speaker. And apparently they are now working on one.
Are they?
So like the Sonos 5s and things like that. Something akin to that, so that you can have more than one and put a true stereo stage together. You can pair them, or some of the other Atmos, the
Dolby.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. EQ control via a dedicated app that will only be available on iPads and iPhones.
Interesting.
Will auto-tune to the room dynamics if you wish it to. So you can tune it yourself if you've got an ear like yours, or ears like yours.
They are quite large.
Or you can auto-tune it based on the dynamics of the room to fit a certain profile of your choice. AirPlay support, Bluetooth support using LDAC.
Right, okay. I've been starting to wonder whether this is one of Pete's rumours, and you've just confirmed it for me with that.
What?
The LDAC thing.
Why?
Because there's no way Apple doesn't support a high-res streaming over Bluetooth on any of their devices. They cap everything at 250 kilobits.
Not yet, because you didn't let me finish.
Go on.
Apple Music will support, if you pay more, a high-fidelity format, which will stream up to 990 kilobits.
I don't believe you, Pete.
Well,
where did this rumour come from?
$999 each.
Okay, But where did this rumour come from? And if you say anything other than my head,
It's from the rumour mill, and my source wishes to remain anonymous.
I think I know who the source is. I would take that with a. Shall we do a traffic light on this one, Pete?
Well, hang on. Can I just see what Erin thinks? Do you think it's credible? How would you traffic light it, Erin? Green, amber, or red?
Amber.
Yes.
But that's
Abby.
Erin.
Abby. Well, I've got 2 for amber. Tom. 1 for red. I'm guessing you're going to go.
I'm going to go absolutely red, Pete, because you made it up, didn't you? Didn't you though? Didn't you?
One day I'd like you to just go along with it, and let's see if anyone picks up with it and actually runs with it. But now you've ruined it forevermore, because I'll go, oh, this could just be one of Pete's rumours.
But and we've wasted like 4 minutes of the viewers' and listeners' lives on this.
I bet you there'll be comments saying, this is a really good idea, Pete. I wish Apple would do it. I bet you.
Okay.
Help me out.
I've got a rumour for you.
Have you?
Your laptop might ship this week.
Well, that's a red.
That's
That's absolute nonsense.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning into the Constant Geekery podcast. Hope you enjoyed the programme. Are we back next week, Pete?
Yeah, no reason not to be.
So
Well, apart from the fact that you might not want to hear.
Okay, we'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in. See you again.
Cheerio.
Cheerio.